Preference. Okay. So we're going to call the meeting to order. The Planning Commission meeting of North St. Paul on May 1st, 2025. So, first item is roll call. You get to do that, which allows you to practice names, which I think is a good thing. So if you, I am here.
There are three commissioners missing this evening, or absent. Commissioner Keen Burback, Commissioner Muick,
Muick.
thank you, and Commissioner Rath.
Rathy.
Rathy, thank you.
Rathy.
Rathy.
I suppose it just depends on how you want to say it. They'll probably answer to either one.
And then, do we announce the liaison?
Generally, yes.
Okay. And Councilmember Nordby is here as council liaison, and Ken Roberts, Community Development Director, is present.
Excellent, thank you. The agenda is pretty basic today. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as written. Or, since there's not a quorum, do we even bother?
I would say no.
Okay,
And if
we will hold off.
we go back to,
If our quorum fills, we will probably approve meeting minutes. Otherwise, we will hold off and do that next month. That being the case, Mr. Roberts,
you want to have the,
we don't have any meeting open to the public. That is to say, there's no one present. So the meeting open to the public is not applicable, and we don't have any public hearings today. So,
for commission business?
Commission business, let's proceed.
Well, we'll start with an introduction.
Yes, let's do that.
Again, Ken Roberts, the new Community Development Director, and I think officially the title is Community Development / Community Services Director, for the help with parks and special projects as well as community development items. Maybe some of the HRA and EDA as well. Are we working, Lisa? There we go. Thank you, Lisa. Now we go, ooh.
It's the special green light.
Yeah. I thought she controlled that. No, she's good. Hopefully she'll get the reverb. As far as my biography, I grew up in Rochester, went to the University of Minnesota, received a degree in urban studies and geography. My planning career started out in the city of Maplewood. I was a planner there for 18 years. Then the community development director in Mounds View for about 2.5 years. I was a planner up in city of North Branch in Chisago County for about 5.5 years. Then moved over to the city of Lake Elmo, planning director there. Then had a little time off. I had a short stint with the DNR working on the PFAS groundwater pollution project. And then about 2.5 years ago, I was hired as city planner in Forest Lake, and then ended up there last Friday and started here Monday. So altogether, 27 or 28 years of local public service. And meanwhile, also was at the at Maplewood. I went back to school and earned my master's degree from the Humphrey Institute in Public Affairs. My short biography, condensed version. Any questions?
I gave you mine earlier.
So then, on the agenda then, there's an item called goal setting. And I was looking back through some recent meetings in the last year or two. I didn't find any that, with the research I did, that there was any one special or one session where the commission put a work plan together, either for, certainly not for 2025. I don't know if one was ever done for 2024. And what I wanted to discuss with the commission tonight is, and maybe you three have ideas of, what are things that you would like staff, which would be primarily me, to put into a work plan to start working on in the next few months as time allows? Are there particular needs or things that are missing that either in the zoning code or subdivision code or anything that you see on a regular basis that you think isn't clear, could be done better, et cetera? I did see the fence code got a major workover last year and rewrite, and hopefully it's better now. Chris says it is.
We did a rewrite of that. We did a rewrite of signage. The intent at one point in time was to kind of look at the whole zoning ordinance and upgrade it, if you will.
Hopefully in small bites.
Yeah, in small bites, obviously. You don't tackle the whole thing all at once, but there's always that overlapping information that has to blend and not conflict, which makes it a bit of a challenge, just even if you do a small bite. I don't know that that I can recall what was sort of next on that list. I know we had talked about subdivision and lot combination. One of the interesting things about North St. Paul is subdivisions, we aren't going to see big subdivisions.
Might
We aren't
not
going
even
to see big
small ones.
developments. We may see lots combined. We may see, individual residents that decides to split their lot because they have a big lot and that kind of a thing. But there isn't going to be any big redevelopment, very likely, because you'd have to tear something down in order to do it. So there were aspects of that we were kind of looking at and trying to figure out, okay, what does that mean relative to the ordinance? The other thing that I think, and I don't know if the two of you will agree with this, but I think you will. One of the sort of overarching, one of my perceptions is as we look at the ordinance and we look at changing language, and this is certainly my feeling, maybe I'm not speaking for others, but I don't, there are circumstances where we're looking at the ordinance and there's stuff in there that are requirements that aren't enforced, or requirements that we look at and they really seem like they don't need to be enforced. Like, part of it is sort of, why is it in there? Why do we have that requirement? Do we really need that? Do we really want that? What are we achieving by having it included? If it's included, then it should be enforceable, and it should be something that we seek to enforce. If we aren't going to enforce it, take it out. So part of it is subtract the stuff that really doesn't apply and we really don't care about. Why put more regulations in front of people if you aren't going to do anything about it? So it takes me back to when we were looking at parking. We were looking at residential parking. And there's requirements in the ordinance written for RV parking on a residential lot. And you can't,
Where it could be,
you
and
can't park your RV in the front yard. You have to park it on the side yard or backyard, and it has to be on a paving, and those sorts of things. And there's parts of me that says, why? Why do we have that requirement for particular aspects of that? I can see why you don't want it in the front yard, but why do we care if we put it on paving? Well, maybe it matters. Maybe it has to do with keeping the site looking good and not wrecking your yard. And the same kinds of discussions we had with regard to fencing. And why are we choosing a fence of a certain height in a certain area on a site? And we have those discussions and then kind of go around and about. And eventually, some of it comes down to, we just don't really care about that. It really doesn't matter. Don't put a regulation in there if you really don't care as a community. So I think it's the less is more sort of philosophy toward revising the ordinance. And then just making sure that it's current, one section is compatible with another, that sort of thing. And I'm not sure that we had any more of a plan than that, because we had a staff member that was working on that a piece at a time. Other than that, I don't know if there are other goals that you would see as.
I would add one. I would add one goal, and we had talked about this, and I believe you all agreed to it. Last year, it was a requirement of this planning commission to review the CIP, and it happened in the end of December. At that point in time, the budget was already decided, the levy was already decided, so it was so, if they wanted to make a change, they really couldn't have. So we had talked about moving that to June or July. We have a great group of people in this commission, so if the requirement's gonna be that the planning commission reviews the CIP and what is worthwhile including and what is, maybe do we push off, let's review it at a time where changes could be enacted, not so far when the budget's already finalized, set in stone, that if an intelligent choice, or a smart choice was made, no action could be done.
And that, Mr. Chair, would not be an ordinance thing, it's just more of practice. To make sure that when the finance department and the city manager and the other departments put the CIP together, in that timeline, they leave us time for planning commission review and recommendation.
And our primary role there would just be to flag anything that looks like it's contrary to the ordinance or something like that, which I would not expect to find, but you never know.
Right, it is also to be consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Right. The comprehensive plan is another thing. What's I don't even recall what is the current status of that. When I was looking at the design manual, there was reference to the comp plan of 2020.
I can answer that.
Yeah?
So the city currently has the 2040 plan, which was adopted 6 or 8 years ago. The Met Council is just starting to kick off the process for all the cities and the counties in the area to update the plans for what they will call the 2050 plan. They're requiring all agencies, cities, counties that do a comp plan to have it, the update done by the end of 2028. So there's a little time. But to do it correctly, I would want the city to have probably at least 2 years. So that means starting it a year from now, starting the update process. But it'll come up pretty fast. So the good news is, I'll just get up to speed and start learning about the city, and then we'll be able to jump into that. So,
Well, and
That'll
the
be
good
fine.
news also is that you have a 2040 plan
yes,
that you can look at. And start
absolutely.
from. And just like when I was looking at the design manual, I was looking at it in that respect too. It's a document that was a good document for its purpose. What do we do to it?
20 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Well, so something I wanted to bring up with the comp plan is, are there parts of the comp plan that are really no longer relevant? Clearly, with the downtown redevelopment, all that will have to be incorporated and integrated, and there'll be new statistics about housing and housing units. But say the number of redevelopment sites has probably gone way down that are available, that we know of. But it'll be more just goals and policies, and that there'll be lots of discussion about that going forward. I don't know enough yet to know if we'll need consultant help to work on that. probably depend a lot on how much other workload there is in the city.
Yeah. I would make the assumption that consultant help would be in order, but, I mean, just based on what I expect your workload is, you're gonna need support of some sort or another. That would be my expectation.
So that'll be something for the budget coming up in
Yeah, and there's
future
nothing,
years.
there's nothing that I would flag and say, oh, we really gotta work on this. You know, there's nothing that, but I also don't have the 2040 plan set to memory, obviously, so. That will be something that we'll have for reading material.
Yes, probably a chapter at a time.
Yeah. Those are,
So, right, and so really, maybe we'll have tackle some of that this year yet, but one thing Brian told me is that the city attorney looked at the current subdivision ordinance, and when I looked at it, I think it was last updated in 1989. Now, there hasn't been that many subdivisions, I understand, but and I haven't spoken to the attorney, but the attorney was concerned that there was some outdated or inconsistent sections in the subdivision ordinance, so I'm going to guess that will come up pretty
that
high.
might be the next one.
That's where I was going, pretty high on the work list of things to tackle. One other thing that was noted to me in one of the conversations was there interest in exploring language in the zoning code about accessory dwelling units?
There was talk of it several different ways, I think. Yeah, I think that probably needs some more serious attention. Yeah. And I think that's an opportunity in our community. Because there are people with, it's interesting because there are people with the little tiny lots that are 40 feet wide or less, 25 feet wide kind of lots, little narrow homes, that kind of thing. And then there are people that have 3 of those or 4 of those. And so they have a big lot. And those big lots could get divided, and you start looking at accessory dwelling.
Right.
And other such things.
And there are 2 ways that those can be incorporated into the zoning code. They can be a whole separate freestanding unit, 600 or 800 square feet or something. Or attached, like almost a separate apartment attached onto the primary structure that has maybe its own separate entrance, where I've seen it in the code that if it's attached, it has to at least have an entrance or a hallway connecting into the main house. Maybe they share the kitchen, maybe they don't, but it's what used to be called the mother-in-law suite. Maybe it's an own bedroom, maybe it's got a small kitchen, maybe their own washer and dryer, maybe not, or certainly their own bathroom. So there's 2 different ways, or both. You can accommodate allowing that separate unit be attached, or if there is enough room, allowing a detached unit on the same parcel, or even if somebody really wants to get creative, turn a garage into a carriage house kind of thing. And
We have one of those that was built across the street from our house fairly recently.
so there's
It's a garage carriage house scenario.
yeah, there's a variety of ways to do that.
Yeah, the unit above the garage.
Used to do a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah,
So is that whole topic of interest?
yeah, I
So
think
the-
it is, definitely. And then, there had been talk of, tiny homes and, what was the other? Yeah, there's whole different scenarios about community living scenarios.
Is that with the sanctuary thing at churches? Where they were bringing in tiny homes and setting them up on church property?
We haven't done, we haven't done that in North St. Paul anywhere, but.
I know that, I think there's one in Roseville that did it. But that again is, there's a whole bunch of state law on that too that supersedes some of the city. Oh.
But that's probably that transient housing, rental housing is probably something that should be addressed in some form or another. It probably isn't right now.
Can't imagine.
Yeah,
Well, that could potentially tie into whatever rental housing licensing and
Mm-hmm.
inspections are done by the fire department.
yeah,
But it takes staff time if you're gonna require registration and all
Yep.
the inspection and all the documentation, and then what do you do if people don't get registered, or how do we even know about them?
I have friends that just Airbnb their home. They live in Minneapolis, and I'm like, who wants to Airbnb this place? And people do. It's kind of crazy. So it's everywhere. Yeah, it's
it is, I'm sure it is, yeah, no question.
which, how much oversight does that mean? I don't know, you know, if it's.
I don't know either.
I think the problem, or only becomes an issue if people are having a lot of parties.
Right.
Or let's say it's a bachelor party or bachelorette.
Well, at least at least the Airbnb entity attempts to control that. The individual owners can really manage that very rigorously if they want to. Every time we've stayed in Airbnbs, there's rules about you can't have more than 6 people in the house, and you can't, this sort of thing.
Reviewed and rated.
In fact, we did one, we went, because I have 4 adult sons and their spouses and such. And so if we go to an Airbnb and we want to get everybody together, it's a pretty big group. So we have to get specific approval when we do that, before we can have them over. So I think that, that industry manages itself somewhat, but like you say, if there's problems, then we'll have to act on it.
Yeah, the city gets the calls, not necessarily.
Yeah.
You're parking and blocking the mailbox,
Yeah.
or if it's in the winter and they don't get cars off the street and the snowplow's gotta get through, then you can start going down a rabbit hole of thinking all the bad things that
Yeah,
may happen.
we do have rules about that.
Yeah.
So it's knowing what the rules are.
Right. All right, that gives me a few ideas for things.
That's some pretty good goals now, it's just a
Yeah.
matter of prioritizing.
Yep. Any other thoughts on goals and code updates, or?
I would ask, because my memory isn't the greatest. When Brandy was here, we were having a discussion about the differences and the technicalities between, and I'm gonna need help, like townhome duplexes or adjoined homes. Do we feel that we got that squared away in an acceptable manner, or did we say we were gonna revisit that?
I think the only thing that I thought was a little quirky was there was a description of townhomes and there was a description of duplex and a description of, I can't remember what the definitions are. There were 3 different definitions that were all very similar.
Twin home?
It was probably twin home. There was different definitions, and it seemed like there were more definitions than there had to be. That was the only thing that I remember from that discussion, is that it's like, why do we call them out so differently? Now, a townhome can be more than 2.
Usually up to 8 units.
Yeah. Twin home, why is a twin home different from a duplex? And I think what we were getting into was the fact that a duplex is one property.
One owner.
And a twin home is 2 properties,
With a property line down.
property line in the middle. But then why isn't that just a townhouse? It's a townhouse that's 2 units.
But well, yeah, that's where.
So these are some of the discussions we had.
Condominiums in there, you know.
Yeah, I think there were reasons that all of those definitions were there. But there were some really fine lines about what's different.
If I recall correctly, did that come up with the little subdivision that's up on,
Over on Delaware
yes,
in 17th?
yeah,
I think that was part of the discussion.
4 units on 17th and then 2 up the.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's 10 total.
Could be.
And they, but I think they're twin homes. I can't remember, I don't remember the definition. They might be townhomes.
Townhomes, because it's HOA.
There's an HOA, yeah.
I don't remember what was decided. I know there was a lot of ironing trying to be done, and I don't know
Yeah.
how smooth we got it.
Yeah. I think it got done right in the end, but,
And adult, see if that needs clarification.
I'm a member of SPAR, and so there is a reason why each of those things have a different name, and I often get confused on them. And so
Yeah.
I'll go down, and I'll look at that and
Yeah.
see if we can look at what the National Association of Realtors.
I mean, I
Because
would
there's a
think-
reason why they're each named a different
And
thing.
it might
And there's,
be
you know,
defined as-
whether they have a HOA, if they're attached, not attached, that's,
Yeah.
because you can have a townhome that's freestanding.
Yeah.
To me,
Yeah.
it looks like a regular home, but it's not. You know, and so I'll look that up, and so by next meeting, I'll get some info on that.
all right.
Any other comments on any of that goodness?
I think that's it. Should we go to item B?
Please.
Item B is the downtown design manual. So, I had given everyone homework to do some review and see what we can come up with as far as what we think needs to be done with it. I had trouble getting my homework done, personally. That's probably why there are people that aren't here. They didn't do their homework and they don't want to get punished.
They didn't want to get called out.
I did look at it and,
May I interject for a second?
Yeah.
For my benefit? I know it's been on the books for about 20 years.
yeah.
What has even brought up this discussion? Is the question, is it still relevant? Are there sections that need to be changed or not, or what?
Yes and yes.
Okay,
I think both of those things are primarily why it was brought up.
okay.
Is it relevant? And if it is relevant, what's relevant and what should be changed or modified or kept? And I think, I got the feeling at our last meeting that it's relevant from the standpoint of it illustrates elements of the ordinance for this region of the community. It illustrates it and it helps to clarify, hey, here's, when the ordinance has these words, here's kind of what we think it means visually, you know? So
Visual
there are visuals in there, and there's images of examples and that sort of thing. So it's an illustrative view of the ordinance is what it was intended to be. And I think it does that reasonably well. I think it's maybe more substantial than it needs to be, but I think there's good stuff in there too.
Well, again, for my benefit, has it been mostly or carefully adhered to while projects have come in?
I would say most recently, probably not adhered to as much as kind of used as a little bit of a reference. It's there, it's in the background, but it's not the primary tool that people are going to look for things.
I'm hearing it's more of a guide than an absolute.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the way I see it too. And it's for both new developments, changes in property and existing properties. If people are going to do something on an existing property, they want to add a patio outside or something like that, public seating.
Or change the windows.
There's some guide to that, advice to say, here's kind of the direction we'd like to see you go. Now, the thing that I thought was most notable about it was built around the Design Historic Review Commission. That's who had the responsibility to create it, and that's who had that's what it's when I say it's built around it. The whole concept was properties in this area were to go to the Design Historic Review Commission for review as part of the review process of if you're doing something on your site. That commission no longer exists in North St. Paul. It was disbanded about the time I started here at the Planning Commission, I think. Maybe 6 years ago? Does that feel about right?
I would say closer to.
More than that, maybe closer to 8. I can't remember. I should have my own dates in my own brain, but I was a member of the Design Historic Review Commission from '08 until it was disbanded, and that was done by Mayor Furlong, if I remember right. At any rate, so the point I'm making is, it was kind of built around that commission. Since that commission is no longer in existence in North St. Paul, what does that mean? How does it change what this says and what the purpose of this document is? And does that mean we just throw the document away? And I thought the general feel was, no, we don't just throw it away, but we change it to be applicable. So now, since that step in the approval process is gone, that means the approval process is to the Planning Commission and to the council. It used to be Design Historic Review, Planning Commission, and Council. It used to be 3-step, as I understood it. And then if there was something really unique, it goes to, gets advice from the Park and Rec Commission or something like that.
And do you know, are there small projects that staff can approve without,
I think yeah, I'm sure there are.
there's thresholds or something?
But I think part of the question is that a clearly defined line? Part of the other issue is looking at the ordinance and things like the requirements of particular architectural materials on a building. I think that, or fencing of a certain type, or outdoor furniture, that's the kind of stuff this is dealing with. It's a lot of aesthetic, it's a lot of, what is it gonna look like? Is it of the proper scale in the community, on the lot where it is, stuff like that. And obviously there are plenty of locations in this document where the Design Historic Review Commission is referenced and it shouldn't be, so that obviously has to change. But let me see if I can find that was one of the things that was very obvious to me. But then there is reference to the creation of space and place in the downtown area. And very specifically, 2 or 3 story buildings was sort of the kind of maxing out. Well, we now have 4-story buildings downtown. And so that was one of the areas when you asked, do we follow this? Well, not exactly.
Right.
Because we specifically approved the apartment buildings that have been built recently. And I think what caught my attention was on page 10, there's reference to building height, where a 4-story building, there's reference here, it says 4-story building dwarfs the 1-story building next to it. And I think, yep, that's probably true. But if we're targeting 2- and 3-story structures, a 4-story structure next to a 2- or 3-story structure is perfectly fine from a scale standpoint. So the problem is we have old 1-story buildings that are just short, little, squat, simple structures in our downtown. I actually worked on a project myself to redevelop one of the lots on 7th, and we could not make a deal work because there was 1-story buildings on both sides of it, and it was far too complicated to put a tall building in between them from a structural standpoint. It just doesn't work well design-wise, and couldn't make it work financially because you kind of couldn't put this building where we wanted to put it without buying up these adjacent lots and doing something with them too. So, so I think there's rationale to this. And yes, a 4-story building next to a 1-story building probably isn't going to work very well. But I don't know that that's the end all of what this should say. I don't think saying 4-story buildings are out of the question makes sense anymore.
Right.
So that's a rewrite.
So would that be kind of on a case-by-case basis, you're almost?
I think a 4-story building, yeah, should be looked at case by case, but I don't think it should be out of the question either. Certainly not with considering the recent developments that were approved for their various components.
And as you know, with the cost of land and the cost of
Yeah.
construction,
Yeah,
if you can get more units or more space going up,
yep.
well, yeah.
So there are quite a few pages related to the whole height of the building and how does it fit and how does it create edges in the area and stuff like that. There's little things like the reference to the comp plan. It's probably not the most current, that sort of thing. And then there's a whole description of the Design Historic Review Commission, which doesn't belong in there, but maybe there should be reference to the Planning Commission and the council, something like that. There's pieces of the history, which are kind of nice. It's just a few pages, but that's kind of nice to have in there. And then there's just parts that I think rewrites are just completely in order. Now, you get to page 19 and it talks about application procedure. All that, I'm sure, is not correct at this point in time. So I think it's good to have it in here from the standpoint of you could give somebody this document and say, hey, if you look at page 19, it talks about the process. To simplify or explain the process of applying for something,
Or you should just say contact city staff.
or contact city staff and get, yeah, exactly.
Like step 3 is DHRC review.
And maybe that's a
That's
whole
like-
lot simpler, is to just say, talk to city staff. They will help you through it.
Yeah.
Because that's what city staff should be doing. They should be helping them through it.
Or nowadays, put a link in there and then you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are things like that instead of putting it all in writing, yeah, maybe most of this just is online and the majority of the content is actually gone because you've created appropriate links to things.
So besides the question about building height, are there any other standards or sections or things that immediately jump out, or is this worthy of another discussion with more of the commissions here? And then the question is, with the work plan is, when do we tackle this versus the other things we spoke of earlier today?
It's a good point.
And I'll speak to my homework, and I'll be the first to admit that I didn't get it as completed as I would have wished. And that was, although it was started, it wasn't finished. It was to speak with the city manager and city attorney to be able to advise this commission on the pros and cons of leaving this as a standalone document compared to rolling it into one of the other existing. And I don't believe I can, at this point in time, I haven't got that information where I could give you the pros and cons of that at this point. So that,
I have a couple of thoughts on that.
Yeah?
My recommendation would be to keep it as a standalone document, as an advisory policy guide. for the town. The comprehensive plan sets the high-level goals and policies for the city. This can refer to those, and they can refer to each other. There can be a whole chapter in the comp plan about downtown design, the importance of downtown. And if you need more information, see the downtown design manual. There are a few references in the zoning code to it. And the nice thing about having it as a policy guide document, like when you talk about the building height, you can have some gray area in there and it'll be on a case-by-case basis. It depends, does it fit or not? Or if you put in the zoning code, you have kind of black and white, it must be this or it cannot be taller than this, then you're locked in.
Yeah.
And so, and to work it as a appendix or something to the comprehensive plan, if it ever needs to be amended, that takes 4/5 vote of the council, and it also has to get approved by the Met Council, because the Met Council has
Yeah.
a comprehensive plan. I would not recommend that. They
Yeah.
don't, the Met Council don't need this or care about this. They talk about density and sewer and water and streets and roads. They don't really care what the buildings look like or your downtown looks like.
Right.
So the way it's generally structured now is I would recommend keeping it that way, just making sure that, and this will be a whole process, the zoning code references to the design manual and the comp plan references to the design manual are consistent, up to date, and vice versa, all the way through. And that'll take work on all three documents as we go forward, but there's value in having it its own separate thing. So maybe just this needs amendments, maybe the comprehensive plan doesn't need amendment yet, or the zoning code doesn't need amendment yet, and they can work together, but yet independently.
I think that's good. There is one thing that I think page 25 references design guidelines versus design standards, and I think that's important to address. In that, is a standard a specific requirement? Because I think it's basically defined that way. And I think those standards, the original intent was those standards come straight out of the ordinance. And this is just a document used to illustrate them and clarify them. And the guidelines are not necessarily, the guidelines may just be advice.
Yep.
And I think there's reference to infill development, which I think is very, very important, because that's essentially all we're doing in this area, is we're doing infill. Or we're modifying an existing building to make improvements to it. So I think that page starts to, that probably needs some serious attention to say, okay, is it still accurate as to what it says?
So here's an example, I just pulled it up for some of the exterior elements. Cursor to the correct place here. So you touched on this earlier, Patrick, streetscape elements and materials. The guideline says when making improvements to private property that connects to the public domain, including the addition of bike racks, trash receptacles, parking structures, fences, or benches, the property owners should match the approved St. Paul style, North St. Paul styles and whenever possible. So that's a guideline. That's what you're striving to do. And then the standard, which gets more specific, when renovation, redevelopment, or new construction damages existing public streetscape elements, those elements must be replaced with the approved North St. Paul streetscape elements. So that's one says that thou shall or must do, where the guideline is, well, you're striving for that and that kind of thing.
Right.
So that's just one example of a guideline versus a standard.
Yep.
And then, so then the question is, I'm sure there's many of those, are those all still relevant?
And I can't tell you that.
That's probably part of the homework.
But yeah, that's part of it is is going through it and figuring out, are they still relevant? Which means reviewing the ordinance, and if we've changed ordinance, what has changed? And should this change in accordance with it? That sort of thing. So that, yeah, it's homework,
Well, or
serious amounts of
if,
homework.
if there's changes warranted to this,
Right,
that's fine. And then the ordinance, whether it's the zone, probably the zoning ordinance says, I think in the end, the zoning ordinance may say you just refer to the latest adopted version of the city's downtown design standard. And just leave it at that, because maybe there's a chapter or an element that changes in this every 2 years.
right.
Okay, now we're gonna do something with impervious surfaces or
Yeah.
building colors. Well, you
Yeah.
don't need to rewrite the whole design manual, you can
Yeah.
just pick on those pages.
I look at something like, here's another example of something. Page 29, there's reference to setbacks. You know, build your infill buildings up tight to the sidewalk, basically line them up with the other buildings around it. And then there's avoiding setbacks. And I think, okay, it's a good guide, but the reality is, if something is designed right, a setback may not be such a bad deal if in fact there's, you know, some public seating in front of it or something like that. That might be a really nice little pocket
For a patio or,
to separate this long, straight front, if you will. Maybe there's an opportunity to do something really, really nice design-wise and do a setback of the building. So to be hard and fast about that kind of rule seems, I'm hesitant to do that because somebody might have a really good idea on an infill.
Yeah.
And we would want
better
to.
idea than the city has?
We would want to accept that potentially, right? And maybe there's some conditional use associated with it or something like that, but I think to rule it out, I think is premature.
Yeah, the question will become with any of these items is, if they're not standards, you're gonna run into the one case where, well, we're meeting the general guidelines. It doesn't say we have to do this, and that'll be the one
Yeah.
exception that,
And will there be one that's just a really bad idea?
right.
And do we have to accept it? How do we put rules and guidelines in place that, where we can have some say in what's going on? And I think that's the challenge of this.
You don't want, as a city, I don't think you want to be so overly restrictive and, yeah, down to every little nut and bolt detail. You want examples that, hey, well, maybe we didn't think of that, but maybe
Yeah.
that is a good idea.
And people are super creative coming up with things, and that's kind of what variances are for also, right? So that they have an opportunity, if it's
Yeah.
something totally unique and they bring it and they're like, wow, that really looks fantastic.
That's a really good idea. Yeah.
Then there is a vehicle to allow for that even
Right.
currently, so. But, and what you're mentioning too is like, a lot of these pages, like 39, they pick a topic, intent, guideline, standard. Intent, guideline, standard, so.
I think it's well put together.
Yeah.
It's clearly written, it's just not accurate anymore.
Sure.
Across the board.
Well, and so I go back to my original question. It's, I think I've gotten the answer that a lot of it is still relevant and useful,
Needs to be tweaked.
tweaking.
Yeah.
My initial look at it, thought, boy, oh boy, there's a lot here.
There is.
Yeah.
Is all of it really necessary? And I can't answer that yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can, because could you whittle it down and make it about half that much? Yeah, you probably could.
Do we care what color the garbage cans are?
But, right, exactly. And I'm not sure we need to be quite that restrictive and say, if you're going to have a bench, it has to be this design of bench. No, we probably don't. But do we want it to be a, shall we say, commercial grade of bench, as opposed to the formed plastic thing?
Right.
Yeah, probably. But how do you write it so you still give design flexibility
Right.
and uniqueness to a particular property, and yet it's high quality?
yet it's somewhat consistent with the whole downtown theme.
Yeah,
You don't want it chartreuse and everything is black.
yeah,
Right. There is something with the continuity of designs, but
Yeah.
at the same time, it's nice to have some things a little different, so it just depends.
So much continuity takes away from the charm a little bit too,
Sure.
so.
Yep.
There's
Right.
something from regulating
A little
a
too
look
boring.
too much, that it just becomes gray.
There's a balance in there. Yep, for sure.
so there was reference in here to the standards of how tall, the 3 stories or 40 feet in height thing. There was another reference to that on page 43. You know, what's too tall, that sort of thing. So those all need attention because we are in fact developing things, the developers are coming and they're doing things different and we are approving them.
Yeah, it's not uncommon now to see 40 and 45-foot tall,
Yeah,
especially in multifamily buildings.
right?
I think for a long time, fire departments were against it because of access and safety, and their ladder trucks wouldn't reach that high, and it was difficult to get water. And now if everything's got fire sprinklers,
Yeah.
less risk than,
And the podium buildings are just going crazy. I mean, they've been, ever since that got approved in the building code, they're doing the parking below and the wood frame above, and they're going up all over the place. Now, there isn't anything that tall here in our community, but,
no, when I was in Forest Lake, we approved one with what you just said.
yeah,
Lower level garage, which was kind of half in the ground, and then
yeah,
3 stories above with a peaked roof, so that
yeah,
it got up to about 45 feet high.
yeah.
But it's
But
a
by-
fairly massive building,
By
but you-
building code, I think you can build 5 stories on top of one. I think by building code, if it's designed right.
that might be a little bit for.
That's
a
too
little
much.
for.
That's too much for the downtown.
But it,
Yeah.
compared to 20 years ago, that's a new thing,
Yeah, it is.
newer thing.
And one of the questions I would have is, there are some buildings that I see currently downtown that deviate from this downtown design manual and
Yep.
couldn't be built currently. Are there any legal ramifications? Basically, we're grandfathering in things that couldn't be built today. Are there any concerns? And I honestly don't know.
Well, you can modify your building. You can refinish the facade, for instance, without it building it taller or, changing its footprint, that kind of thing.
Well,
So those might not be compatible, but if they're going to change the facade, then they should be using the guidelines as to this facade change.
I looked at it as, if I were to buy Newman's, I could move into, buy Newman's, but I couldn't build with the standards in this downtown, I couldn't build an identical Newman's right next door. So is that okay to?
What's your thoughts on, what's your concern with that?
Just making sure that we're not opening up the city for litigation by saying, although we allowed this or this is existing, we wouldn't let someone new come in here and build this, just to make sure.
This is this is common building code. I mean, there's new building code, but you couldn't expect someone to take, my home was built in 1887. There's no way I could get the stairwell to fit current height and run and rise. So it's like, you have to have some flexibility without, it would be so cost prohibitive. Are you suggesting that the old places need to be brought up to current code? Or, because there is that discontinuity in buildings right now. There's 100-year-old homes, 130-year-old homes, and businesses, and
Non-compliant.
they're not, but to get them to be compliant, no one would run that business.
And you
couldn't
can't-
afford
You
it.
can't walk down the street and say, your building is not compliant with our current code, so
Right.
you have to change it. You
Yeah,
can't do that.
yeah,
Agreed.
If they choose to change it,
right.
then you can require them to do certain things.
Yeah.
But you can't go to them and say, you are forced to change it.
And to answer your question, Jason, I don't think there's a problem. most buyers of a building, commercial building, hopefully have done their due diligence and understand, oh, by the way, you're in this downtown district, and if you want to do things, there are certain standards the city expects you to meet.
Right,
And if they don't, it's kind of a shame on them
yeah.
if they haven't done that due diligence. So I'd be very surprised if there be anything.
And the current situation is it's a known thing. There's new code, and if you're gonna build a new home, you build to a new code. But
Well-
to take any old home and have to make it, right? Even when you remodel, some things you're required to bring up to, if whatever area you touch, you have to bring up to current code. And sometimes it's prohibitive,
Right,
and so,
I wasn't thinking of things like that. I was, in my mind, it was specifically the attached patio. We would not, by the downtown design manual, we would not allow an attached patio because it says you can't have setbacks. So to me, it was things of that nature.
Right.
that The design concept
Yeah.
has changed. Is
Yeah.
that okay?
and at the same time, there's a part in here, and I'd have to find it, where it talked about, we encourage businesses to have outdoor seating for particularly restaurants.
Right.
So it's like they're asking for that, but yet the bump
The
back thing.
setback thing is,
And in Newman's, it's an open area that goes.
it's a whole open lot.
It's a whole open lot, so, but, so yeah, there's some areas that probably have to be looked at and kind of maybe nuanced and really looked at collectively for what would be best and what's allowable but. So your concern was more like, if someone complains there's litigation, well, why can Newman's do this and I can't?
Right, you know. I'm
Newman's has
still
been there for since
Right, but I'm still
1887.
new to the city council and
Yeah.
government in general, so I've done it from the ownership side.
Right.
But I've never done it from the setting policy, concerned about litigation side.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, would it be helpful to bring this back to the next meeting, and maybe ahead of that meeting, I'm taking some notes, and maybe for the commissioners who aren't here, point out the things that were at least brought up tonight that are potential concerns, and then I'll review it in more detail, of course, in the next month, and try to put kind of a list together of, here's things that have been identified as potential problems, may need changing, tweaking, however we want to describe it, and then have a list to kind of work through. I would want more direction before I would jump in to start trying
Yeah.
to amend it.
Start revising it, yeah.
Right. And,
There's, for instance, there's a whole section on awnings. I think there's multiple pages about awnings, and I'm thinking, we don't need to be that specific about awnings. Yeah, okay, there's probably something we want to put in there, but we don't need 4 pages of awnings. Then again, there are images, which also helps. I think images are a really good thing. But then I'd like to see some of the images updated, especially when they're images of North St. Paul buildings that don't exist anymore, as an example.
yeah,
I kind of got a chuckle out of the drive-in liquor store. I always thought that was interesting. I know that was in existence when I was a little kid, and every so often, my dad would drive through the drive-in liquor store, and I thought, as I got older, I thought, wait a minute, you're going and buying liquor at a drive-through? Huh.
Yeah.
Sure, why not? I suppose. There's a whole series of appendices with forms, which, as you were suggesting, it's just a link to the city thing, besides the fact the forms, I'm sure, are not accurate anymore. So from the standpoint of, if you had a project going on today and you said to somebody, here, go look at the downtown design manual, it's meaningless to them because none of those forms are applicable. So that's reason to give it attention. I don't know that it becomes the priority, but it's kind of not a useful document in that regard. So something to think about as far as setting priorities for yourself. And I'm not gonna try and set your priorities with regard to this right now, because I don't know.
I don't know yet either. But, well, okay, so if I may, do you feel value in having it brought back at another meeting?
I think so,
Okay.
yeah.
And would you like some kind of a list that I try to assemble of things that were pointed out tonight
Yeah,
and
kinda
things that I
tag
see?
stuff.
Okay,
And I can give you more specifics as to what I was looking at too, if you want it, but.
please.
I can go through it with a little bit more fine tooth myself, and at least
And
flags,
if anybody has ideas of
yeah.
things that look wonky or no longer relevant, or conversely, if there's things that are really important that you think we want to make sure we continue to have in it, it'd be good to know that as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other comments?
The only other thing that I thought was interesting is when the Design Historic Review Commission was in existence, and we actually hired a historical specialist to go and look at communities, portions of the community, and I think the one I recall was specifically 18th Ave. They did a study of 18th Avenue because there's some nice older homes and things like that there. And the result of that was, yeah, it's probably the most likely area to be appropriately suited for a designation, a historic designation. But when all was said and done, they said, not really. It's not really quite in the realm of possibility.
Not like Stillwater.
And that was sort of the best we could do from a historic perspective, and I think that's when the Design Historic Review Commission started to kind of work its way down, because the historic components of the community are too diverse and dispersed.
Yeah.
You know, there's a little house here, a little house there, that kind of thing. And there is not a district per se that really is applicable. And so then,
We don't have a Summit Avenue.
there's some really neat old buildings.
There are.
If you do the historic
Get
tour,
an area
it's
where
really
it's a
fun.
collective in a row.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that was a component of, I think, why the Design Historic Review Commission kind of just fizzled, because there just wasn't that much of the historical component to look at. So anyway, just that's a little piece of history there. I think we are to reports. Are there any? Anything from commissioners? Liz, you have something really interesting you want to share?
The garage sale, the city's garage sale.
Currently going on? Yeah.
And then the following Saturday's the cleanup day.
Next week is cleanup day, which is always a really good event. It's probably going to rain. No.
That's the spirit.
No, there were a couple of years we brought stuff to the cleanup day, and it was just pouring rain, and all the city staff is out there just getting drenched. It's just awful for them. But on the other hand, I think it's really well done. It's always been really well organized and really easy to get in and out and get rid of that stuff that you.
I sat in at a meeting Tuesday about it, and they're emphasizing, and for any of the public that might be watching, the line closes off at 11.
Mm-hmm.
If you come after 11 o'clock, you're not going to get in.
Yeah,
If you're in line and it looks like they can manage it, you will get to dispose of your things. And you have to be a resident.
Yeah.
They check IDs, so that's two important items to remember.
right. Very good. I appreciate that. That's, we don't stop there every year, but when we do, we're really glad it's there. It's just a really handy thing.
You'd like to think after a few years there'd be less stuff and there's
Yeah.
less need for it, but
Wouldn't you think?
every year they keep, yeah, so it's a great service.
That's why people keep having garage sales too.
To collect stuff so they can dispose of stuff?
You collect stuff so you can get rid of it. Another thing that, Liz, you recognize, the Buy Nothing.
Oh,
You
yes.
participate in that. That's another wonderful
It's a good
community
resource.
event.
People come and pick up their stuff.
If you're into Facebook, it's a Facebook linkage that's local. And
There's a very active.
I happen to know about her involvement because my wife is involved in it, and they've exchanged stuff at various times.
She's taking my stuff.
Yeah, isn't that the idea, is to get rid of things?
And the idea there is you can borrow things, you can give things away, you can take things from someone else that wants to get rid of them. You can, put your wish out there, that kind of a thing.
I can't tell my wife about this.
It's very good. It really is.
I think the
But
lending thing, I think the borrowing thing would be fantastic.
it's really good.
Yeah, a lot of people
And-
don't need each thing all the time, so.
And the
that'd be great.
reality is,
It's-
it's set up, so the whole intent is you're not exchanging money.
Right, yeah,
And you're not taking something from someone else to sell it.
right.
No.
You want it for your own personal use, and it's just
And
really
it's
handy.
nice knowing that the stuff that I no longer need
going.
is going to somebody that really wants it.
Yeah,
And they come and pick it up,
yeah,
which is great.
So you don't get ghosted and
it's very good.
Yep. And I don't want money for it. I just want
Yeah.
it to go away.
The space it was taking.
Yes.
Well, and have it serve a useful life.
Yes. That's
another
the
one.
other thing. Yes.
I don't have any other reports other than, we talked on the Met Council and the comp plan update, so. Be thinking
It's-
about that, it'll be
It's coming. So is CIP. So that should get on the agenda when it makes sense to get on the agenda, but that's a little bit up to council to stay within their schedule and throw it back to us when the timing is right. Maybe one of these days I'll get to a council meeting.
Yeah, just December didn't make any sense.
Well, if you guys wouldn't have your meetings on Tuesday, they're more likely I would be there, but. All right. That being the case, I think we're finished with our agenda. And I don't know that I even need to officially have a motion to adjourn since we don't have a quorum. So we're just going to adjourn.
At, let's say 7:37?
7:38,
7:30?
if you